We are going to look at a sample response from this prompt that you all practiced yesterday. So just to review what the prompt says, it asks, how does the point of view toward the ocean, an excerpt from The Open Boat, differ from the point of view toward the ocean in Sea Fever? How is the difference in attitude conveyed in each text? Use details from both texts to support your response. In your response, be sure to 1. Identify the attitude toward the ocean in each text. 2. Explain how the difference in attitude toward the ocean is conveyed or communicated in each text. 3. Use details from both texts to support your response. Here is a sample response that I wrote, and I will first read it with you and then review the various parts. The ocean is featured in both the excerpt from The Open Boat and the poem Sea Fever. The point of view toward the ocean, however, differs drastically. The attitude toward the ocean in The Open Boat is one of anxiety and fear. In contrast, the attitude toward the ocean in Sea Fever is one of excitement and affection. Notice that this is a very short introduction that uses words from the prompt, explains that there is a difference in the attitudes, and very quickly says the first one, Open Boat, has anxiety and fear as the attitude, and the second, Sea Fever, has an attitude of excitement and affection. Now we'll go into discussing The Open Boat. The attitude in The Open Boat is conveyed through imagery. For example, in paragraph 1, the narrator describes the view of the sea from the boat, quote, "The horizon narrowed and widened, dipped and rose, and at all times its edge was jagged with waves that seemed to thrust up in points like rocks." This imagery supports the attitude of anxiety and fear. The ocean is described as constantly moving, and the words jagged and thrust up in points like rocks reinforce the idea of the ocean as dangerous. Another example of imagery supporting the point of view toward the ocean comes from paragraph 10, when the narrator states that there was a terrible grade in the move of the waves, and they came in silence, save for the snarling of the crests. The words terrible and snarling strongly support an attitude of fear and anxiety about the ocean, especially for the sailors who are trapped in a small dinghy in the treacherous waves. Okay, so to notice in this paragraph, introduced, this is conveyed through imagery, this attitude. For example, and then we have one example with a quote, and then the quote is explained with this imagery supports the attitude, and discuss a little briefly beyond that. Then a second example from the same passage is introduced. There's a quote. The quote is explained, and that wraps up the discussion of the attitude towards the sea in the first passage, The Open Boat. Now we'll move on to the second passage. Sea Fever presents a very different attitude towards the ocean. Through the use of imagery and repetition, feelings of joy and affection are shared by the narrator. "I must go down to the sea again, for the call of the running tide is a wild call and a clear call that may not be denied." The first half of this line is repeated 3 times, suggesting that the speaker wants to be in the ocean. The imagery of the sea calling and sounding wild and clear is a positive description. Another example of imagery that shows an affectionate attitude toward the ocean is, "All I ask is a windy day with the white clouds flying and the flung spray and the blown spume and the seagulls crying." The narrator emphasizes the beautiful nature of the ocean with a nice wind, clouds, and ocean spray, along with the gentle sound of the seagulls. This imagery supports a positive view of the ocean. So to look back on this paragraph, we transition to talking about the second passage, having a different attitude towards the ocean, using imagery and repetition to support the feelings of joy and affection. Then there's one quote, and then the quote is explained. And then there's another example of imagery from the same passage. There is a quote to explain it, a quote, and then the quote is explained further. And now we have a wrap-up paragraph at the end. Although both texts present the ocean, the attitudes towards this majestic body of water are very different. While the open boat presents a fearful point of view of a dangerous stormy sea, Sea Fever presents the view of one who finds the sea to be a beautiful place of adventure. In the short conclusion, we mention both texts, the different attitudes, and sum up what they are. It just needs to be very short. So notice the pattern here. You're being asked to write about 2 passages and contrast them, a couple examples for each, and then you're all set. Good luck.